guys, welcome back to another episode of I Am I. My name is Joshua Ansley. Am I too close? Am I too close? Am I scaring you? Well, perfect, because that's what we're going to talk about today. Fear in the eyes. All right, so we're moving on to the next klesha, right? Which binivesha, which is clinging to life, is what it's translated as, which we would refer to as fear of death. And then we could take that down to whittle down to basically any fear. Because any fear, we could argue, that comes back to some sort of fear of death, right? Fear of the unknown, right? And so that fear of death, even something like public speaking, like one of the most common fears in humanity, can be boiled down to if you don't do well, if you're not good, if you're not accepted, right, then you'll be judged, you'll be ostracized, and we are social creatures, and if we're not part of the tribe, part of the clan, then we will, perish, if you will, right? So in some ways you could argue that all fear is ultimately a fear of death. But as in these kleshas, as I've said, fear is something that everybody has, and it's also, by the way, not necessarily a bad thing. I will, again, talk about it in regards to the kleshas, but I also just talk about it in other modalities because I can't help it. But so understanding that fear, 'twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace those fears relieved, right? Fear is a powerful part of the process of understanding. It's not just such a bad thing. When we stop taking our doubts, fears, and anxieties and making them our enemies, actually they can be really powerful guides, really powerful signposts on what we need to continue to do or to continue to not do. But as with all the other kleshas, we just need to take these principles into our lives and observe them and start understanding how they affect us and how they rule our lives. They're not necessarily bad, but how does it rule our lives? Because I would venture to say that... I had a booger. I had a booger. Can you see my boogers? Can you see my boogers? Am I too close? I would venture to say that pretty much all of your decisions are being made out of fear. Pretty much all of them. You don't realize it, and that's okay, but that's the difficult part, is actually recognizing where the fear is infiltrating our lives, because we're ruled by it subconsciously. We've been conditioned by fear from day one, right? And it's natural. It's a natural part of duality. When we have this duality, we're going to fear. We have, again, how the kleshas are all related to each other, right? So we have, before this klesha, we have likes and dislikes, our wants and desires, and then our hatreds, our attractions and aversions, right? And so fear is, we have fear that we won't get what we want, and we have fear that we will lose what we already have. We have fear that we won't be enough. We have low self-esteem. We have fears of everything, right? And we have to recognize how fear manifests in our lives. Obviously, fear is, again, a sense of that duality, and that duality is a result of the ego, which is separateness. It says that I'm here and you're there, and I have this individual personality. Even if they be good things about us, it's still meaning that we're separate, that I am different from you in some way, which is fine, because it is true. This is just my opinion. Well, it's not an opinion, it's pretty much fucking real, but the philosophy might say that's just an illusion. That would be Maya, right? But I do believe that there is that separateness. Separateness does exist, but at the same time, the singularity includes the duality, which I always say, and that we are also absolutely connected, right? But it's not a denial of the duality. It's just not letting the duality rule our lives, right? So that letting the ego rule, and of course the ego is a result of that ignorance, right? The ignorance of our divine core, of our nature. And the only reason why we have fear of death or clinging to life is because we are ignorant. We are ignorant of the eternal nature of our core. If we really understood the concept of our eternal nature, then we wouldn't be so afraid. There'd be nothing to fear, right? Now, that's why I say that, of course, there are things to fear. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace those fears relieved, like I said. And that, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Because it's valid. Now, this fear mechanism that we have on a physical level is valid for survival. It's right. We have it for a reason, right? So there is a valid understanding of having fear. But when we don't recognize how much that fear is penetrating in our entire lives, in our minds, and the entire way we operate in this world, and our decisions that we're making, and the ways that fear manifests, right? So fear can manifest as anger. Like fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, right? And we know where hate leads. Crazy eyes. Be afraid of the crazy eyes. So, it can show up as anger, and so because we have these defense mechanisms on top of it, so that we wouldn't even be able to admit our fear, because society tells us that if we're afraid, we're weak, and if we're weak, then we won't survive, right? So it's all these like layers of shit that we're not even recognizing the decisions that we're making. Again, our likes and dislikes, if we're ruled by them and making our decisions ruled by our likes and dislikes because we're afraid of losing what we have, or afraid of not getting what we want, then we're going to make decisions based on that. And we're going to make decisions based on our ignorance, and that's where the fear is starting to rule our lives. And I would venture to say that we don't even know it, that we're not even aware how fear is manifesting in our lives, right? Again, it comes in as, as low self-worth and low self-esteem, right? That's all fear. It's fear of not being enough. Blah, 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 blah. You are enough. You are enough. You are enough. Okay. Seriously, you're too much. You're too much, Josh. You're too much. You're too much. All right. No, you're not. You're perfect. You are perfect. All of you, including you, Josh. So, back to fear. So truly, if we're talking about clinging to life, this is on we're being ruled by, again, that primal reptilian brain that is operating the system, right? And as long as we're not running from any bears, right? If you're living out in the world, now some of us actually do live in a society or in a space where we might actually be fearing for our lives. But, a lot of us, particularly watching this, are probably not actually afraid for our lives on a daily basis. However, if you're watching this, you may have been afraid for your life on a daily basis. Maybe in childhood growing up, we've all been conditioned by fear. Society, our parents, it was the way they were taught. It's a tool to use to condition somebody, to get somebody to obey. Right? So you're afraid of, there'll be threats of either punishment or losing out on something you want to have. Like it's all operating on your fear system, right? And so that is going to permeate in our lives now to this day if we've not really worked through those fears. It's a fucking bitch. And society does it. I mean, marketing does it. It's fear of loss. It's always operating on fear of loss. If you're not aware of this, you're going to fall victim to it. Hell, even if you are aware of it, you're going to fall victim to it, right? They make you feel like you'll miss out on this opportunity or that you're not good enough without it. Like that's the whole game. If you're stuck in this system, everywhere you look, there's just signs. Everyone wants to get something from you. They want your money so they can get something, right? Because they're all afraid that they don't have enough. And really, that's what it really comes down to, is not living in that buzzword abundance mindset, right? It's living in a lack. It's understanding lack. And if you really understood, and that's I say practical, even though it's not very practical, but I mean comparatively, it's like understanding how to live in an abundance mindset would alleviate a lot of the fear. But really, if you knew and had awareness of your divine core, of the eternal nature of your divine core, then what fear could there really be? Right? Now, the mind is always going to be afraid because the mind wants to be in control, and the mind is limited. The mind will perish, right? The body will perish, but this eternal core, the eternal core of our nature will not perish. It is imperishable. Right? It is not even physical. It cannot be contacted. It cannot be wounded. It cannot be touched. It cannot be hurt. No weapon forged against it will be victorious. Right? And if you understand that, even if it's just a psychology, if you work into the psychology of safety and strength, right? If you work into the psychology of love and connection and recognize your wholeness and fullness already, if it's because you think some God gives that to you, or there's some ultimate source, or if you just recognize your divine higher self, or recognize that you are that everything, that wholeness and completeness, if you have that wholeness and completeness, you have no fear of loss. You have no fear you wouldn't even fear death, right? Now, there's maybe maniacs and sociopaths that don't fear death, but that's really just out of ignorance. You also may be ignorant of the danger, right? So not having fear doesn't mean that there's no danger. There's absolutely going to be danger, but fear is how we respond to the danger. I did a vlog about this like about a year ago and stuff about fear, so a lot of this is kind of repeated, but it doesn't mean that there's not danger. But the fear is how then we respond to the danger. So if we can train ourselves to understand and operate from that place of wholeness and completeness, then we can take action in a state of flow, in a state of avoiding the danger without having the fear rule us, right? And now, but the fear, again, is an important aspect. If you haven't gotten to that space yet, fear is a survival mechanism, and it can guide you in which direction to go, because we must use discernment. I'm not talking about just fearlessly stepping off a fucking building, right? That was the test that, this Satan character in the book gave this Jesus character in the book that said, well, if God will save you, then just jump off this fucking cliff right here. And he's like, okay, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. Right? So, he was like, no, I'm not going to fucking do that because I'm discerning that you're a jerk off and you're making me think that I can actually fly, and I can't. Maybe he could, maybe people can, or maybe he just couldn't. Maybe he didn't believe he could fly, right? So maybe he didn't have enough faith. And that's, you know, another thing is like, I like to think that, you know, some people say the opposite of fear would be faith. I don't believe so. I believe it's love, because fear is a type of faith. It's just faith that all the wrong shit's going to happen. But you have faith that's really your mind having faith that the bad shit's going to happen. It's also, fear is something that cannot live in the present moment. You have to be fear. It's, again, this dualistic nature, because it has to be fear of something else happening. It's a fear of something happening in the future. It can't happen right now. You're not afraid of what's happening right now. You know, you're afraid of something else. You're afraid of it's about to happen, even if it's a millisecond from now. So you're afraid of something that's going to happen in the future. Pain can be very present. The pain that you're afraid of can be very present. But the fear is a fear of something in the future, right? So if you really knew that you weren't going to die, that's why, like, just look at our belief systems and recognize which ones are holding us back and which ones are not. Which ones are no longer serving us, because they're going to change. Can you be brave enough to look at your belief systems and actually see which ones are serving you? And maybe ones that now are going to serve you better won't serve you 10 years from now. So maybe understanding reincarnation might be a really powerful belief system for you, to understand that you're never going to die, so keep moving on, right? And so that there is no, how would it change us if we really didn't have this fear of death? Like, what actions would we take if we were not afraid? If we didn't have a fear of starving, or if we didn't have a fear of doing any of the stuff? Because then from that space of wholeness and completeness, then we take action, and we can actually take greater action from that space, so that we don't fulfill the fears, right? And if you're into like manifesting and all that stuff, then it's just very clear that you're going to manifest your fears. All we do is manifest our fears. Whatever the fuck you're afraid of is going to fucking happen at some point, in some way, right? I don't know if you're afraid of like Armageddon or something like that, maybe, you know, but I don't fucking know. And that will happen, actually. It will happen. You're all going to die. You're all going to die. So fear death, right? We can't live that way. Can't live that way. Let that ignorance, let the stories go. Let the stories go and start to live in love. Live in connection with a deeper sense of yourself. This eternal nature that cannot be wounded, it cannot be hurt, it cannot be touched, right? And that space, from that space of connection and wholeness, then begin to move forward in this world and see how your actions are different. See how your choices are different from that space, so that you don't operate out of fear. In the Keshe, I am you. You are me. Namaste.
She's a modern yogi. She loves to stand up on her hands. Yes, it feeds your ego. That's exactly what she needs. Now tell me, why the hell do you give a damn? So pardon elocution of my Sanskrit declension, termination, and know whatever that means. But I know when she's in the Prasarita Pada Tanasana, she's the hottest asana that I've ever seen. She goes